Welcome everyone to our panel discussion today. Voluntarism, or how to better protect children in destination countries, will be the question today. We have an outstanding group of experts who came far ways. But first of all, this discussion will be in English. Everybody speaking English? Wer mich nicht versteht, wir haben eine Simultanübersetzung. Der kann hier stehen, Damen am Rand. Also wer sowas haben möchte, soll sich bitte melden. Otherwise, I'll continue in English. My name is Sonja Kolonko. I'm a journalist for German public television, and I'm currently working on a documentary about volunteering abroad, so I'm quite occupied with all these questions. And our panel includes an outstanding group, as I said, of experts from NGOs as well as the tourism industry. We have Damien Brosnan from the Code, the British Nikki White from APTA. Where are you? There are you. From the British Travel Association. But before I make the introductions, let me quickly sketch out our schedule today. We'll start by 2 short presentations from Antje Monshausen from Bread for the World and from Anita Dodds, who is a criminologist for Southeast Asia and also came all the way here to Berlin to speak to us today. And after the presentations, our actual panel discussion will start. And should any questions arise from you, please save your questions towards the end. Then you will have the opportunity to ask our panelists everything you want to know. So let's get started with Antje Monshausen. Antje, you are the head of Tourism Watch, Bread for the World, and member of the board of ECPAT. And you have recently done a study where you analyzed over 50 different voluntarism offers in regards to their child protection measures and their sustainability. And I hope that you're starting today by first of all explaining to us what we actually mean when we talk about this term voluntarism.
Yes, good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen. Well, the term voluntarism in Germany is a little bit difficult because not everyone understands voluntarismus. It's not really established as a word in German. But what we understand is short-term volunteering opportunities that last between 1 week up to 3 months. And most of those offers in this time frame are offered by commercial tour operators. Before we are starting to look at the figures that we already discovered, I would like to take the opportunity that we are part of the Teachers' Day today. So I would like to invite you to a short fantasy trip. Please imagine that you are a teacher in a school and there's an international volunteer coming for 1 year. It's very difficult at the beginning because the language skills are a barrier for good communication in the beginning. But this person is very motivated, and shortly after 2 or 3 months, this person can offer homework courses in the afternoon, and even started to teach sitar, an instrument from the Indian background that he or she brought with him. So this is a very, very good opportunity, a learning experiences both for the volunteer as well as for the pupils and hopefully for the teachers as well. Now please imagine that every month 3 volunteers come at the same time. Some have good English skills, others not so good. Only a very few learned some words of German before they came. They bring in interesting ideas, but it's impossible that they can teach on their own. This was unfortunately promised to them when they booked their trip. The good thing is that they have a very good relationship to the pupils, but maybe this is because they are sitting outside at the sports ground at night, drinking a Coke with the pupils and sometimes a beer. So now we have these 2 pictures that I confess are very black and white. The reality is gray in between, for sure. But I think we all agree that it depends a lot on preparation of the volunteers, on good mixing of the experience and the background that the volunteers have with the work and the activities that they should conduct during their volunteering time. It has a lot to do if there are preparation courses where the volunteers could reflect on their own motivation. And it also depends if national laws, for example, child protection law here in Germany is applied, so that everyone who is working with children has to bring a background check, etc. And if we are looking now at volunteerism from relatively rich European countries to relatively poor economies in the global south, we also have to ask which kind of advertising is used to attract the volunteers. Are this advertising, is it diminishing neo-colonial cliches, or is it supporting those cliches? So I think these are very relevant questions that we wanted to find out how tour operators who have projects for the German market, if they are having standards for this in place. I would like to say that responsible short-term volunteering is possible. It is possible to do it in a responsible way, but it's quite difficult to meet all the requirements for selection, preparation, cooperation at eye level, as well as child protection. We did our analysis about these standards already in 2015, and now 3 years later we wanted to see again how do the German products look like, or those products that could be booked in Germany. So we analyzed 50 products that you can book in Germany by 25 tour operators, commercial and non-commercial sending organizations. And the first of all that we have seen is that the market is growing tremendously. We now see 25,000 travelers from Germany who are going outside for doing such a volunteer activity. This is estimated an increase of 50% in the last 3 years. Also, the number of tour operators is growing who offer such activities on the German market. But while the quantity of the products and the number of volunteers is increasing, we see that the quality of such projects, at least what is presented on the home pages of where you can book those offers, is not increasing simultaneously. This is one of the central findings of our study. I only want to go into very, very few details because we don't have much time for this. Sorry. Okay, I want to have a very brief look at the selection processes. You will find more details in the study that lies out there at the table. With the selection process, we see that a formal pre-selection process is not conducted by all of those operators. To the contrary, some of those operators advertise explicitly that they can place every candidate to a project. Based on our analysis also, proof of language skills is also not required widely. Regarding the existence of preparation procedures, the good news is that every tour operator who is publishing information about preparation courses is offering preparation courses in the host country. The majority of courses last 1 to 2 days, but only very, very few operators offer preparation courses before the volunteer placement starts in the sending country. And all those courses that are offered in the sending countries, they cost additionally, and they are not a precondition for participating in such a project. Let's jump to the duration of stay. Our analysis shows that we have an increase in flexibility of the programs. We have very short minimum durations of stay. When we have done this study the first time in 2015, 5%, only 5% of the operators that we have analyzed offered trips that last minimum for 1 week. Now we have 14%. So the number of projects where you can stay for 1 week tripled over the last 3 years. As I said before, we are not looking into the procedures of the companies. We have only looked at the home pages and catalogs and the information that is provided there. So we cannot say anything about the real duration of stay, but another study here in Germany showed that the average time of stay is 7 weeks for those projects. Half of the volunteers are staying maximum 5 weeks and less, and the other half is staying between 5 weeks and let's say 2 months. So the last point that I want to look at is the child protection activities. Sexual exploitation of children and travelers by travelers and volunteers is one of the most severe concerns associated with volunteerism. So we will discuss this issue in more detail today. I just want to mention that 42 out of the 50 products that we analyze provide activities with children. But only 40% of all providers have a code of conduct for their customers. And when we are looking at more holistic child protection policies, we see that 19 out of 25 have no strategy for child protection in place, not at all. And 6 companies have procedures in place, but only 1 is a holistic child protection policy. The last topic that I would like to focus in is volunteering in orphanages. Studies from all over the world have shown in the last 10 years that the numbers of orphanages is increasing due to the demand of volunteerism. The majority of orphans who are living, so-called orphans who are living in these orphanages, have living parents. So they are not able to fulfill their human rights to grow up with their children, but are growing up in these institutions. Orphanages should only be the very, very last solution for a child that could not grow up in a family-like environment. Internationally, orphanage tourism is very much criticized, and also in Germany in the last years, some operators have refrained from offering such activities, but still 14, the majority out of the 25 operators that we analyzed, still have these products in their catalogs. But this is the finding that we have from the German market regarding their demand and supply. We have also seen that internationally there are more and more standards and guidelines that were developed. Some by development agencies, others by tour operators or travel associations. I want to mention just briefly, explicitly, the certification scheme from South Africa, from Fair Trade Tourism. It's the one and only certification scheme for voluntourism. So it's a very good example that we can learn a lot from. Unfortunately, going back to the German market, we have to recognize that these standards and guidelines are not yet implemented here on this market. We have organized 3 years ago an intensive dialogue with the voluntourism operators, and we received a lot of interest theoretically. But today, with our analysis, we see that not that much has changed as we wanted to see. With this panel today, we hope to continue this dialogue and to see how volunteerism, and we want to see how volunteerism can meet the expectations to contribute to sustainable development, to global learning, and overcomes the risk associated with child-focused projects. So I'm looking forward to the presentation and to the debates. Thank you.
Thank you, Antje. Please have a seat. Please have a seat, and next I want you to welcome Anita Dodds. She's a criminologist and a child rights consultant from Southeast Asia, and she is going to give us now the police perspective on what damage has already been done in the destination countries due to volunteerism, but also what measures need to be taken or have already been taken. Anita, it's your turn. We are very excited.
Thank you, Sonia, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be here this afternoon and actually share about the police situation. And I guess some of you may be wondering, what is this connection between police and tourism? But in fact, I'm working with police across the Asia region, and in terms of looking at the issue of voluntourism, we decided to approach police to try and determine not just anecdotal information, but information about real cases, about what's happening with the situation of voluntourism in their countries. And so, in approaching the police, we went to, let me just go here. We received responses from police in 11 countries. And from those 11 countries, countries that are receiving a really high level of volunteers at this time, you can see from the countries listed there that the police were very honest about the situation that's happening in their countries. In particular, we asked them about what are the main volunteerism projects in their countries. And without doubt, across all of them, orphanages were the priority, followed by schools, then kindergartens, childcare centres, child sporting facilities and healthcare centres. So they're seeing a large escalation in terms of interest from volunteers who are wanting to come to their country, and particular focus is on child-centred projects. In terms of asking which countries have experienced situations of volunteers who have sexually exploited children while they've been volunteering in those countries, 10 of the 11 countries identified cases. The one country that said no was Singapore, and as you can imagine, as a developing country with very strict regulations, it's not a popular volunteerism destination. Tourists are instead choosing to go to those other countries on the list, including, as we said before, countries like Bangladesh, Cambodia, Indonesia, Thailand, Nepal, Philippines, very popular, and these are countries that are already experiencing cases of child sexual exploitation. And this isn't just the cases where travellers are coming to the country as short-term travellers or business travellers and engaging in sex with children while they're travelling. This is actual cases where they are volunteers who are volunteering in a project, an orphanage, a school, a healthcare centre, and abusing children while they're in that country, in that project. In terms of police are concerned on two different levels. Firstly, they're concerned about the risk for children being exploited across any of those types of child-focused projects. But secondly, they're very concerned by the escalation of volunteerism, meaning that volunteering is creating a potential market where, because projects want to have volunteers, they're creating a market where more volunteers means more potential risk, but also more projects. And it also means the escalation of fake projects. So projects that call themselves orphanages, whereas Antje said before, potentially the children in that orphanage have one or more living parents, and they've been encouraged to come along to this centre to be there because the project can actually gain potential profit from them living there. When we spoke to the police about, in those 10 countries, about the cases that they've been experiencing, it was quite alarming that it's not just one case in one country, but the police cases indicate multiple cases across those 10 countries. As an example, for Philippines, we've seen recent cases of US volunteering in an orphanage in Manila, sexually abusing girls. A United Kingdom pastor volunteering on the islands near Boracay, sexually abusing boys. In Thailand, we've recently seen a US volunteer setting up fake orphanages, and he wasn't the one abusing children, he was selling sex with the children who were based in that orphanage. We've seen in Malaysia and Bangladesh recently that volunteers working in refugee centres, often working with Rohingya Muslims, are abusing children in those centres. In Vietnam, we saw a recent situation where a French volunteer was volunteering in a hospital and he sexually abused young child patients in the hospital. In Vietnam also, an Australian volunteer working in a street children project convicted of sexually abusing young boys. In Malaysia, we've seen a UK volunteer working in a Christian community project, using that as an opportunity to befriend the local community and then sexually abusing boys in that community. And in recent weeks, we've seen in Cambodia, the police have advised that a 6-year-old girl in a kindergarten was sexually abused by a foreign volunteer. That case is still before the courts and still under investigation. However, that was a foreign volunteer in that project. I think it's alarming, and the police think it's alarming. And the alarm is on many levels. Firstly, the police are alarmed that volunteerism has escalated so quickly, and actually it's exceeded police action. Police feel they're a few steps behind at this stage because at the national and international level this is still so unregulated, and it's been in the past a perception of good intentions of tourists coming and supporting a country, and yet they're seeing on the law enforcement side that often the reality is quite different and the risk is quite high. They're also aware that there's low awareness amongst police. In terms of dealing with tourists, police are often looking for lost passports or dealing with petty crime and tourists losing their possessions while they're travelling, not cases of tourists who are in projects with children who are sexually abusing them. So at this stage, police feel a lot of alarm, but they also feel a divide between themselves and the tourism industry. Not just the private sector, but also the government side in terms of government ministries obviously looking to bring in large volumes of tourists, looking to escalate the number of international visitor arrivals, and yet at the same time trying to balance that we're minimising the risk to children at that same time. In terms of actions that police are currently taking, they're training the police themselves, but they're also starting to do training with organisations who are working directly with children and receiving volunteers, foreign volunteers. They're making visits to projects and starting to familiarise themselves with the activities of those projects, but also conducting monitoring and surveillance when they suspect that there are suspicious circumstances with a particular project. Of course, they're involved in investigations, and unfortunately, when they're involved in an investigation, this usually is after a suspected case of child sexual exploitation. There are hotlines being set up in certain countries and hotlines already existing in others, and laws are being changed. Malaysia has recently been adapting their laws to have stronger penalties relating to child sexual exploitation, which will then apply to volunteerists as well. There were two key questions that came from the police during this recent study that we've done. And the first question said, you know, we respect that tourists have good intentions. The majority of tourists coming to volunteer in our country have good intentions. But why do they want to work directly with children? If they have good intentions to support the development of our country, why can they not work in environmental projects or infrastructure projects, and of course be properly equipped to make sure that their contact with children out of hours is also at a safer level? And their second question, coming from quite a few of the countries, focused on, if we're allowing these volunteers to come into our country and work in our child-focused projects, why is that okay in our country? Why is it not okay in Germany or Australia for volunteers to come and work in your schools with your children, take them on excursions, take photographs of them? And so I can understand completely the police perspective that this is being allowed in Bangladesh, Nepal, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand. Why don't we allow similar things? Why don't we apply those kind of allowances in Australia or Germany or other countries as well? So I'll leave you with those two questions and look forward to further discussion as we progress in the panel. But Sonia, thanks very much for the opportunity this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anita Dodds. Please have a seat. Anita, after hearing all these terrible stories about what can happen because of volunteerism, I'm really happy or glad that we are here to discuss today what can be done to prevent similar events, and that's why I want to please get on the stage. Want to start into the actual panel discussion, and I would like to introduce you to our panelists. Next to me, Damien Brosnan came all the way from Bangkok to speak to us today. He's from The Code. That's an industry-driven initiative. They have developed guidelines with a special focus on companies who are offering volunteerism products where children are involved. And then we have Kerstin Dohner. She's from Eckpert, Austria. And her job is trying to convince travel companies to actually sign the code, right? You have to tell us more about that later. And then I welcome Theo Noten. He's also from Eckpert, and he's a manager of the Defense for Children program, a program we are very excited to hear more about later. And you're also chair of the Better Care Network Netherlands, a network which was designed to facilitate global action for children without adequate family care. Welcome. I would like to put the first question, though, to Nikki White from the British Travel Association, APTA. Nikki, you have noticed about 2 years ago, you told me that a growing number of your members went into volunteerism or were very interested to join this market. And so the APTA developed guidelines for volunteerism. I had a quick glance at them and found there's something like put processes in place to safeguard the children and other vulnerable people. That sounds very good to me, but stays a little vague, if you don't mind me saying that. What can you tell us about these guidelines? What are they intended to do?
Thank you, Sonia, and thank you all for the opportunity to speak today. You're right, this is an area we've been working in a couple of years since we launched the actual guidelines. We've actually been working for a lot longer on child protection as a whole, particularly with ECPAT and other organisations for many years. But it was in about 2014-13 that we noticed a lot more media attention on volunteering, including children, but all volunteering. A lot of negativity in the British press, not just on volunteering. It can be quite negative on lots of things, but particularly around this issue. And it was an area that our members, who are travel agents, tour operators, cruise lines, didn't necessarily have a great deal of experience with in terms of understanding issues behind the products that they were offering. So they started to talk to us about needing some sorts of guidelines when they're putting their programs together, trying to responsibly buy the products in destinations, work with responsible projects, because until we had some of these headlines, we hadn't actually realised as an industry how many fake projects and dangerous projects there were out there. So it was starting, said, to work with organisations, as you see here, to really get to understand these issues properly and put guidelines together that are specifically for the travel industry. They might seem a little vague to you, but in terms of what the industry needed, they needed something specific about working through their programs with all the different types of members that we have and all the different types of business models that they have. It was giving them the groundings to get the basics right, thinking about some of the core things like safety from a starting point, then thinking about how you actually go out and purchase these products, then thinking about how you market it, because we'd used images and language for many years that we thought was fine, but again, until it was brought to our attention that it was leading to the wrong kind of interactions, we hadn't realised as an industry that we needed to do things differently. So we start talking about that as well, and then also about how to get the right kind of people for the volunteering and the projects, because again, in the industry, I think for many years now, people have gone thinking that they're going to do good projects. They've bought them from operators, and the operators are thinking they're providing good projects, but not really understanding the link between the experience that's being sold to them and what the reality is on the ground. And people have got a lot better at feeding back to our members when the experience hasn't lived up to what they thought it would be. I think social media has allowed an awful lot more of that these days, so it's much more transparent when the projects and the experience isn't what you think it's going to be, because people are sharing their experiences. Before, perhaps volunteers would go out and not know that it wasn't the experience that they thought they were going to get, and they just went along with it. And they just went along with it. So it's helping unpick a range of complex issues and really understand how the travel industry can specifically apply that to their business and when they're purchasing and particularly marketing the projects that they have.
What was the feedback so far from the industry members or from your members to these guidelines? Were they helpful? Can you give us a concrete example of how it helped to actually better the situation?
Yeah, I can give you examples of how it's helped, but I think it's also fair to say that it wasn't the easiest set of guidelines to put together. They're tricky issues in there, and with all the partners that we're working with, and one of the sort of biggest pieces of stakeholder engagement that we've had on a set of guidelines, it took 2 years really to work with those stakeholders and come to a place where everybody was happy with the issues that we actually addressed. So not everybody got what they wanted, I would say, straight away, but the guidelines are in a good shape that it helps all the players in it.
Which were the problematic issues? I'm sorry. Like, for example,
orphanages at the time were tricky, and interactions with children, because again it was an area that wasn't necessarily understood how you could get the right kind of protection for the volunteers as well as the vulnerable people in destinations as well. So navigating some of those tricky areas was as important as actually then putting the guidelines into place. So since they've been put in place, we've seen the sort of actions taken by member, a real change in the language around the marketing. So taking out words like, do you love children and want to take part in an activity that will involve cuddling children and giving sort of your time to children, which said those things existed because people hadn't appreciated how negative and how damaging those issues were. So we've seen that change in language, changes in imagery as well. I think, Antje, you mentioned about images and how we could perhaps be adding to the problem by having the wrong kind of imagery in the marketing. So we've seen a big shift in the types of images used. But also fundamentally a shift in types of products that are being sourced and the type of excursions, for example. So we've got one cruise member who has fundamentally changed the type of excursions that they offer to their customers in the destinations they go to because they understand the issues more now, they know what they're looking for. So starting to see that change happening amongst our membership.
Thank you. Damien, the Code is another industry-driven initiative that focuses mainly on projects where children are involved or on volunteerism operators who offer these projects. What differentiates the Code exactly from the APTA guidelines?
Thank you. Well, the Code works with the tourism industry across the world and has done for many years in conjunction with a wide network of local NGOs, including a lot of the expat groups from different countries. So we work not just with operations that involve volunteerism and operations with children, but with hotels, cruise liners, airlines, airports, the whole range of the tourism industry. So the number of our 300-odd members that is offering volunteerism products, it's quite low, but we think that as the rising awareness has come through in the last few years, we felt that our members also needed to take responsibility to ensure that children weren't affected in a negative way from operations in countries where there might be volunteerism products offered. So about a year and a half ago, we rolled out a volunteerism policy for the members of the Code, and we've asked our members and potential new members to also adhere to these policies. And they're quite firm around orphanages, where we're drawing a line in the sand, essentially saying that volunteerism activities involving orphanages or residential care facilities are not to be a part of the offering of products. And that for those other activities that do involve direct contact with children, there are some additional requirements that we ask our members to undertake.
For example?
Things like police checks, feedback from both the volunteer and the organisation that has been hosting them after the time is finished. Training and pre-departure training that Antje mentioned is a key and is often missing. Things like these, we think, are at least raising that level, that threshold of child protection, and we think by discouraging entirely the volunteerism in orphanages, we send a clear message that supports the findings of studies like the ones that have been mentioned, that a lot of these facilities have been set up with a profit motive and are definitely not in the welfare and the best interests of the children involved.
And how do you make sure, or how do you control that all these policies you put in place, that they actually induce a change?
So for companies who are wanting to become members and recognised as members of the Code, we ask them to demonstrate and provide evidence that these additional criteria for volunteerism activities are in place. So for new members, before they're accepted and recognised as members, they need to provide evidence of things like the training, things like the feedback mechanisms in place, having a child protection policy, police checks. So we think that this is at least a starting point. We then ask for an annual report from these same companies to give feedback to us, and we also work with our local partners and expat groups in countries, both sending and destination countries, to also work with these organisations to keep an eye on what's happening in the reality on the ground.
One of these groups is Kerstin Donald from expat Austria. You're actually trying to convince companies and travel agencies to sign the Code. What are the obstacles, or why should or why do you experience is a travel agency reluctant to sign the Code?
Difficult question, yeah. I think it's often more a human feeling of maybe being rejected or accused in advance of something that you haven't done. And sometimes it's just a shame, I would say, to say, no, don't know enough about it, so maybe we just look away, or we are not perfect because we don't have all of the standards in place that should be. So I think the challenges...
Are they generally aware of the problems Antje has mentioned in
Very often not.
Yeah, I
very
think so.
often not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the awareness building is the first step, and then I think the second step is really to build a bridge, and this is the challenge, to say, yes, you do have maybe really good volunteer projects that are worth taking part in. Just, make sure you do things right, and it's a process, and just start, and then you will see how you go and where the hiccups are, and you get support from us, and we're happy to support you. So get started, yeah.
I think Egbert Austria also developed or spent 2 years developing a handbook for organizations who send volunteers abroad. It just sounds like another set of guidelines somehow. So where's the difference, or why did you do that? What was your intention?
Well, the intention was actually to really help building this bridge and to have a tool to involve the people, the partners, and to really be aware of the problems, start from the beginning. What we've developed, this guidebook or tool, I think it's a great opportunity to actually just sit down and learn something, and also give you the opportunity to add to it. It's not something that you learn once and then implement, and then somebody comes and checks you every once in a while. It's something that you have the freedom and the opportunity to develop. So actually you have, if you in your company see that there's 1 or 2 points that are not deep enough for you and you want to engage more in that part, you're free to do that. And then in the annual report, we can have a look at it and just further develop to the benefit of all participants.
Okay, but that is surely true for the APDA guidelines and for the code as well, that it's a process more than something that's written down and done with, right? Okay. Thank you. So far we have talked more or less mainly about what has to happen on the supply side, on the side of the volunteerism operators. But I think there has to happen a change on the demand side as well. That means that volunteers, I think you all wish for volunteers who wish for or choose responsible projects and who really think about what they actually can do and what they can give back. And Theo, you're the manager of the Defense for Children program. Part of your program was a multimedia campaign directed to young potential volunteers. Now I try to say it in Dutch, but my Dutch is even worse than my English. Stop weeshuistoerisme, is it right? Stop orphanage tourism, something?
Stop, yes.
Can you say it?
Stop weeshuistoerisme.
Oh wow, that sounds good. But honestly, if I were 18 again, I would choose a project where I can work with kids over one where I have to build a stupid wall or something too. So how can a campaign actually change these preferences? It's just more fun to work with kids, isn't it?
Well, yeah, we did, before we started this campaign, we did also research on among providers of volunteer projects, or bring supply and demand, people looking for volunteer projects and volunteer projects looking for, or projects looking for volunteers, that the most wanted projects are projects with children.
Exactly, yeah.
And as children in sports, or children in education, children playing, but also children in orphanages. And so we thought, and the providers, they said that they knew, and 97%.
That's what I found most impressive.
97%
and they still offered it. Yeah.
Orphanages were not a good place for children to be, and they knew about the problems around them, and only 26% wanted to change their products. And the argument was that the demand for projects with children was driving them. So we decided also to do a campaign with social media to make young people think about the effect of being a volunteer with children, and especially children in orphanages. There was a lot of debate around this, so it got a lot of media attention in the written press, on radio and television. And even at the beginning of this year, there were even questions asked in Parliament about this. So to the Minister of Development Corporation, if there should not something more be done than just allowing it, because there are no rules and regulations around this. We do not yet know if young people refrain from this and are much more interested in, let's say, volunteer projects with the environment. So that would be, I think we have to research this year,
right?
because we are now half a year later. But at least the debate was good, and one of the biggest volunteer projects providers, they decided not to do any orphanage projects anymore, and also to promote this among their colleague organizations in other countries in Europe. So I think that was at least a good success, but we are not sure yet how young people themselves think about it. But there were a lot of stories of young people in this campaign that in retrospect thought, well, actually, I did not so good at all. So there were real people telling these stories, and they were also later in the media. So in that sense, to making people think, and I think we have to do this more.
What do you think? I want to ask you, all of you, do you think we need just regulations, or do we need more media campaign to raise awareness under the future volunteers?
I think we need more regulation, but we see in many countries, and I think this is something that you could also confirm, that there are regulations in place, but they are not implemented. So there are many countries, for example, who are very strict on opening of orphanages, but there are many private orphanages that are just open anyway. So we need both legislation, but also sensitization, awareness raising. And I would like to add one more point. It's not only the issue of orphanages. Also, if you are going to environmental projects, you are living in communities, you are living in host families, you have access to children, you are a power figure and an example for the youth at the destinations where you are volunteering. So we need child protection generally when we are talking about volunteering, not only in regard to orphanages.
So what are other problematic fields? I mean, I can imagine like volunteering in an orphanage. Most of the young people I talked to during my research have heard that it's nothing good or nothing they should actually go to. But what would you tell them? What should they look for? Like, how do they really notice a good project from a bad project? Kerstin.
Maybe it starts with your self-evaluation. What kind of qualifications do you have? What are you looking for? What can you give? And not so much continue this idea of I go and I give my time and it's automatically something good. I have to really engage with the needs there and my own qualifications. I think this is something maybe, well, I had a personal experience with that. No, I was thrown into a project. I had no clue how to work with children, and all of a sudden I found myself alone with a group of 25 little kids between 2 and 6. So this is the worst case scenario, really. And then, of course, you can, if you look for something, you can really think specifically. If I had chosen to inform the organization I was working with about my qualification, I was lucky. I spoke the language. But this is one point. But there's so many other different things where before you decide to volunteer and to choose your project, to really have a look at yourself, sit down and evaluate what you can give. And I think that's a good starting point.
Yeah, Nikki, I was going to ask you, how do you motivate your members? I mean, I imagine it's going to be very difficult because, of course, a travel operator or a volunteerism operator wants to take everybody and not only the good ones or the qualified ones, and they don't have time and probably don't want to invest any money in checking their applicants. So how do you manage to raise awareness there?
That's one of the core parts of our guidelines, and that was one of the big sort of thorny issues where we made a real switch to saying that members, when they were putting these together, had to put more emphasis on the pre-orientation, which Antje mentioned earlier as well, making sure that the volunteers actually ask the right questions to begin with, ask lots of questions. How much information can you get back from the company? Do they really know about the detail of the project? So you can start to understand if they've got enough relevant information so that they know if it's a good project. And then asking, said, about the pre-orientation information. Do they actually give you that support? Do they give you the kind of skills that you need to have? And then, is it actually right for you? So you can think, as Kirsten said there, really thinking about, is volunteering actually right for you as an individual? Because some people just emotionally can't cope with some of the situations they get put into. So really having a hard look and saying, is actually that the right option? And we're talking about young people going volunteering, but the other thing we're seeing is a big increase in older gappers, those that are taking time out. So again, making sure that they're asking the right questions. And what we've put in the guidance is for our members to ask their customers as well to work to a code of conduct in there, thinking about safety, thinking about their own behaviour standards, so that there's an expectation on the volunteer to think about how they need to turn up in that country and what the expectations are of them as a volunteer. So much more awareness of that now being added into guidance for members so that they are asking the right questions of the customers and putting that emphasis on them, not just leaving it to the volunteer to think about.
But your guidelines, if I understood it right, are just guidelines, and your members can follow these guidelines, but there's no report system or something like that included, right, like with the code? Or do you monitor somehow how many members actually follow your guidelines?
We don't monitor in terms of what they're implementing. They are guidelines. We have guidelines on many different subject areas, and we're just not resourced, unfortunately, to monitor everything. But I think there's so much media attention on the issues these days that members want to do the right things and want to understand the issues and how they can change things. So we get them coming to us when they find experiences that they're not sure about. They'll come and ask for guidance. We'll direct them to NGOs that we work with as well to get better information. But we can't sort of measure everything that they're doing. And actually, when you look at our membership of over 1,200 members, there's only a handful of people truly offering these type of experiences. A lot of the other organisations offering these, and perhaps some of the experiences that aren't so great, aren't actually our members. So it's how do we actually influence those people outside of our membership as well, as a whole.
I think there's a real opportunity to leverage the feedback and the instant and visual feedback often that both the organisations sending and the volunteers themselves and the host community are able to give. And I think the reputational risk is something that can really be emphasised for members and non-members of our organisations, and to actually put it in bottom line terms, to say, you know, this will cost you money, this could cost you criminal proceedings, this is going to tarnish your reputation and prevent further business in the future. I think that's something that we can really work towards.
Yeah, Theo, you.
Yeah, I'm curious what will be the effect of the recent Oxfam, Safe, Red Cross, UNICEF affair, because there will be other requirements for organizations operating in relief development cooperation situations, and this no doubt also will have an effect on volunteering, or because that is also development cooperation sort of effect, having working with children. Like this week was a meeting of the Dutch Minister of Development Cooperation with all the organizations that receive money from the ministry to do relief and development cooperation projects, and she said that from now on there would be a zero tolerance policy on any child protection infringements and child abuse infringements. So we have to rethink and especially organizations offering development cooperation sort of projects?
Antje, we have only like 8 minutes left.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just quickly. I think the connection between those both is very obvious, and we see that many organizations in development cooperation, humanitarian work have quite good and elaborated standards for the selection process, for internal whistleblower procedures, for all those procedures that a child protection management system needs. So the consequence of this could be that even more people try to use the entrant through short-term volunteering. So I think this is an issue that we have to be very aware of, that those who are using their power that they get while working in so-called developing countries, those people will go to those institutions and those companies who have opened doors for this. So the pressure will be even higher to have good child protection measurements in place in the future.
Thank you, Antje. Before I want to give you the chance to ask any questions to our panelists, I have one last question to Anita, because I was wondering, while listening to all of you, what did the police actually tell you? What would they wish for? Do you think that all these regulations really reach the people in the destination countries or already reached them?
Thank you, Sonia. As we discussed before, police are dealing with the horrific side of volunteerism, and as we've seen from the cases that they have brought up themselves, this is happening already, that we're seeing cases of children being sexually exploited by international volunteers in child projects overseas. And so police had a lot of recommendations. Those recommendations really focused on improving standards, on child protection checks, on no orphanage tourism, looking also at training for key target audiences, for police, for the tourism sector, for communities. As Antje said before, looking at the fact that volunteers are not just in child-focused projects, but environmental projects where they're going out at night and have direct access to the community. And so police are seeing firsthand the actual cases of children who have been abused by tourists. As a result, I think they're deeply concerned. They've come up with these recommendations, but I feel really encouraged hearing from the panel this afternoon about the important steps that are already being taken. So when we hear about things that's happening with the code, when we hear about the work being done by NGOs and groups like ECPAT and by the tourism industry itself, I think that's really heartening. So I'll certainly take that back to the police in terms of steps that are already being taken. But it comes back before when you said, what actions do we need to take? I think there's not one action, it's a multi-leveled approach. Just as Antje was saying, we can't just do one campaign and think that's enough. It needs a multi-level approach from all stakeholders. And I think that's where it's positive to see that groups like NGOs, private sector, governments are involved in these child protection initiatives because it needs all of us to be involved. And I think that leaves me with good information to take back to the police, but also a challenge for the audience here and a real encouragement for the audience here, because I know we've got a lot of tour operators here, people working in hotels, in the tourism industry, students who are here, and it is not just the responsibility of people on this panel, but in your careers, in your profession, I really encourage you to think about the actions that you can take individually or as an organisation or as a business to ensure that there is safeguards for children in terms of the businesses and the work that you're doing. So yeah, I'll certainly take back this information to police and feel really heartened by that, but also feel it is a joint responsibility and we can all do something about it, not just listen to a panel while we're here for an hour, but really take action ourselves.
Anita, you've done the perfect final statement already. I couldn't do it any better. Thank you so much. But nevertheless, I still want to give you the opportunity to ask any questions. Are there any questions? There's one? Okay.
Okay, hello, my name is Marianne Pilbig. As you say that you need this involvement of all stakeholders, you probably need support of the government generally. But in these developing countries, it's probable that these governments have other priorities, unfortunately. So how do you get them involved, and how affected do you see your activity by corruption?
It's quite hard to hear the question, but I understand you're asking how do we get governments involved. Is that correct?
Yes.
Certainly. Obviously, political will is a very important part of getting government attention, and there's a lot of priorities in the 11 countries that I mentioned earlier. And it takes just one of those government stakeholders to actually move things forward. And I'm pleased to say that in the countries that I mentioned, we have a network of 900 trusted police who are taking action to move things forward. But it's different from country to country. Recently, we've been doing some work on these things in Maldives, and it's actually the tourism ministry who's taken the lead and is moving things forward, and now they're doing training with immigration, with police and others. So it just takes one agency within government to start leveraging other members and other stakeholders, other government departments to become involved. I don't know for others on the panel from your experience if you'd like to share, but for example, in Vietnam, it's been the police who have led the way. They're the ones who are seeing every day cases of child sexual exploitation at the domestic level, at the international level, and so they're the ones who are moving this forward themselves.
Yeah? Kerstin?
I would like to add one thing, that also the project now to win over the commercial agencies is also supported by the state in Austria. So this is a project that actually receives financial support. Yeah, can you hear me? Okay. So I think that's a good sign too, you know, to have the support from the sending countries and from the kind of the industry to really get people join and get people more active.
Yeah, Damien, you have...
Sorry, very quickly, just
39 more seconds.
Two more examples of ways that governments might be involved. One is that at intergovernmental, international, regional mechanisms, which are increasingly we're seeing in Latin America, in South Asia, where governments are working together to see this as a priority. The second one is pressure from the tourism boards of countries who are really concerned about a positive and maintaining a positive impression of their country as a destination and as a safe and family-friendly and child-friendly destination. So there are two other ways that can be used.
I feel we could discuss this much longer. Yeah, well, do we have the time? Could anybody give her the microphone, please?
Okay. My name is Sherry. I'm from Greece. I'm a tour operator. Around 25 years, I'm in the tourism industry, different countries. I want just to ask a suggestion for your panel. If we can get more promotion in the part of the airlines and hotels and tourism, we can promote our target for the children's and for the goals we have it, to protect the children's and for the whatever we are saving our kids of these problems. I believe that is the most important, not just to forecasting it, but to shape it through our offices all over the hotels and airlines. This is, I believe, is most important, to give it to direct to the people and to our staff to work it out.
I think
I saw it in ITB, very powerful, thank you very much. But we like to see it in when we are operating these programs. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your input. I think, if I understood you right, that you also wish for actually what we just demonstrated we are on a good way to do, like put in place more regulations, more policies, more awareness-raising campaigns that really actually make the change in the end. Yeah, I think we've learned today that we have a wonderful set of tools already that just need to be applied on a more wider basis, and that we don't only need a change on the supply side, but also on the demand side, that the volunteers that goes out to all the future volunteers out there. Choose your projects wisely. And I think that's everything we can say so far. Thank you for listening to us, for being such a wonderful audience. If anybody has interest in our brochure, you can take it from the table over there, get some further information about the work all our panelists are doing here on their day-to-day basis. Thank you for your input. I think we have had a wonderful, very informative discussion. And well, Antje, I hope next year we won't have any volunteerism-related problems anymore. What do you think? Thank you.